don't mind starting again. I can go and log into my computer upstairs and it'll be clearer.
Yeah, now we are live. Here we go. I believe we do have to start again. Hi, everybody. Let's do that again. Welcome to the Built Environment Book Club. We're gonna reset. Tonight I have with me Neil, and Dan is listening in, so we will wave to him. And Kata. Hello, Kata. I like your little owl picture.
Yeah, that's me. Hello, how are you?
So, hello. So I don't know if you've heard the other meetings, the first few chapters. Tonight we're discussing chapter 4 and 5. And mostly through the lens of AI. There have been a lot of AI in the news recently. It's quite Google heavy, but that's probably because there's only so many companies at the moment who are doing press about their AI work. And yes, so the first piece of news that came out a couple of days ago was that the NHS and Google's DeepMind have signed a contract together for a 5-year project to review patient data. The DeepMind will aggregate the patient data and then start to ping clinicians, alerting them of any patients with early stage kidney problems. So we have that. And then, of course, there was also on the more fun side, this was going around social media, the AI experiments. I don't know if Neil said you've played with the quick drawing game.
The quick draw game is really interesting. Can you still hear me, by the way? Still hear me?
Yes, I can.
Cool.
Yep.
Yeah, the quick drawing game was really interesting because seeing people talk about the complexity of AI and it can take over the world and those bits and pieces, but this is sort of demonstrating where we're at. Which, I mean, I'm not trying to discredit the progress that they've made. The progress is amazing. There's a computer guessing what I'm drawing within 20 seconds. That's incredible. But I think it does demonstrate that we're not going to be overrun by the computers just yet.
No, I think at the moment we're still feeding the AIs our test sets. And what an amazing way to just kind of crowdsource it from the world. This reminds me, I don't know if you guys seen the film Ex Machina.
No, I haven't.
About a gentleman who creates an AI in the form of a young lady. And the guy is kind of the CEO of a company like Google, like a big, and he the way he uses his AI to speak like a normal human being, like a woman, was to kind of hack everybody's mobile phones because that's the company he has. He uses normal speech patterns to train her. So it's an interesting concept, and it's if you can have thousands of conversations happening, your AI will start to learn very quickly what normal human speech sounds like.
Desktop. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Dan has.
That is far better.
Dan telling me something very interesting. Akinator. Let's see what that is. Well, while I go look up what Akinator is.
So I think the NHS example is quite interesting and one of the things we were talking about before we came online was talking about sort of the origin of the innovation and DeepMind being an invention from UCL, University College London, a school from the UK, and it's interesting that these things are coming out from there. I mean, I think it's encouraging that they're working with the NHS to do these things. I'd much rather it be those guys than others, because obviously UCL has close ties to the NHS as well. It has its own hospital there as well. So I wonder if that's where the work is happening. And yeah, I think it's encouraging.
Yes. You can get the link that Dan sent, but we might come back to that. Yeah, so before we came online, you were also talking about kind of the homegrown tech in the UK, and the recent autumn statement that's come out. There's a lot of there's definitely money earmarked for R&D. And you were mentioning how we're stepping away from the austerity and back into investment.
Yeah, I think those are the interesting words. From looking at previous autumn statements, but statements in general, it's about spending and cuts and this, that, and the other. And it's interesting that the words have shifted over to things that are more investment based. They're investing in infrastructure, they're investing in R&D. I guess my only hope is that money does get distributed well. I'd imagine Innovate UK is going to be a fundamental mechanism in getting that money to industries like ours. I think the other interesting announcement that was part of there is the fund for investing in companies to go to get past the point of sort of being bought out by large corporations. They want to see, it's interesting to see that the government wants to grow new large corporations that are British based. As we were talking about previously, if you look at some of the technology, for example, that Autodesk have acquired over the years, you've got Jetstream, which was original holders for Navisworks and bought by Autodesk. I'm not saying that's the products are still very good. The thing I'm saying is, it'd be nice if we didn't keep inventing things and selling them to other nationalities in terms of that. But I don't know. I guess, am I being a nationalist in saying that? I guess I want to see innovation be placed into the best hands that can develop it the best they can. So there's a balance. I'd rather see it the best people for doing that. But then it'd be good to see some larger companies be grown from scratch in this country. So we're not just selling our ideas all the time.
I think that idea also plays into the skills issue, the skills gap issue, mainly as a selling point, where so kids in school here in the UK would know this is happening. You don't have to move to California to do this sort of thing.
Yeah.
A lot of it wasn't until I moved here that I realized Grand Theft Auto,
where it's just as sunny.
Say that again.
You can move to Milton Keynes and it's just as nice instead of California.
Well, that is one of the places where they're testing out the driverless car technology, isn't it?
I think that's where the Future Cities catapult is as well, I believe.
Is it?
I could be corrected. I think it is.
Yeah, so this, what did I say before? 390 million investment in future transport technology, including driverless cars. Oh, excuse me. It must be true I sneezed. Yeah, so that plays right into our line of work, I guess, in the built environment. That's a lot of the history of America is kind of the history of the motor car, isn't it? How the highway system, all of that, suburbs and all of that, it was affected by the primary mode of transportation. And it would be very interesting to just see how things play out with driverless cars and other new kinds of transport.
And it comes in time. It's like a cultural point in time, because you think of the car as sort of a symbol of freedom, and if you look at the stats behind people gaining their driver's license, the average age is starting to creep up. Younger people are starting to, I remember turning 17 and the first thing, driving lessons for your birthday, and and it's learn to drive as quickly as possible. And I think that's changing. So, and looking at the sharing economy and what have you, and I think the in terms of sort of the environment for the business model for different types of transportation might be becoming stronger and stronger as time goes by. If more people, more people live in urban places, these, all the roads are starting to become very congested, and people will start to think about other forms of getting around. So it comes at an interesting time.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I was Dan had provided a link to the early form of quick draw. So if anybody out there wants to have a look, it's en.akinator, akinator.com. But it's not a Google thing, but it's a Google-like thing. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so we were also talking about the photo scan, the new Google app where you could take a photo of a photo as a speedy way to archive all the hard copy photos that you already have and digitize them and put it up on your cloud drive. But of course, that I think is another way of crowdsourcing more of a test set for the various Google AIs, including like their image captioning AI or their image recognition AI. What do you think, Neil?
Yeah, I think. Have you ever heard the story about how Google Images came about, or the Google search and the development of that? I think it's in. I'm looking over there. I can't remember if it's an audio book or a physical book I've got, but it's the sort of the story behind Google and their innovation. And yeah, the algorithm for Google search came from trying to prevent adult imagery, shall we say, coming up in Google searches for pictures. And what they managed to do whilst doing that is come up with a really nifty way of recognizing shapes and the AI around image recognition in Google, which is quite interesting. So I suppose it's an example of inventing one thing to do one function, but it ends up being a far greater tool.
Yeah, and having much wider applications.
Yeah.
I think that happens in tech a lot, where people want to do one thing and then kind of work on the side to do this tiny little other thing to enable that work, and then all of a sudden that secondary thing becomes actually really useful and actually fits a need greater than that one that they had. I think that is also how things kind of spin out. Where I was reading a book on the creative economy, and they were talking about, Weta, the production company, post-production company, who did Lord of the Rings, and they created software to do all the big scenes where there are lots of characters, and called Massive. The software is called Massive, and so once they were done with that, they were looking at ways, well, what else can we do with the software other than just create scenes full of lots of people or orcs running around? And it turned out that it was really useful in kind of modeling safety scenarios, or actually disaster scenarios, and figuring out what would be the best ways to approach it, like earthquakes and that sort of thing. So this is where, again, in Future of Professions, you have something that came out of movies, but it's computer science, movies, dealing with problems, came back all the way around, is now dealing with crowd control and public safety. There aren't hard and fast lines anymore.
Yeah. I think in terms of the conversation of AI that goes through the book, I think it's interesting that how can I put it? The focus is on like the assistive nature of AI, not the. They highlight in the book that the profession should be thinking hard about their role in a AI assisted world, but not to the point of their eradication. It's more to do with the cream of the crop of the resources in professional services, instead of them being boutique and expensive and only available to the wealthy. It's about the dissemination of that into a wider availability. So there's sort of like a general raise of quality, which I think is quite an interesting way to look at it, because I think a lot of people think that, you know, the automation that comes from things like AI, they're thinking, oh my God, like all these people, like, you know, what happened in automotive, where all these people that worked on the assembly line have been replaced by robots. The same is happening with the professional services. To an extent, that is sort of true, I think, but because of the nature of professional services is about, it's a service. It's more of a service than a production line. So I think it's more of how do you make that service more widely available. So it talks in the book about law as a profession, and, you know, the world's best lawyers, you know, as we know, they're expensive and they're only available for the people that can pay for them. Getting that high quality service further down the, I don't want to say supply chain, but sort of more broadly available, will do nothing but good. You know, people being able to get access to high quality level advice on things like that, I think will be an excellent thing.
I think it is changing the landscape of what's considered work. I mean, even at the moment it does talk about AI as kind of, there's the technology that you can leverage, the routinization. So, you know, you still the experts are still valuable, the human beings are still valuable, and where the technology comes in, it's just kind of, it's technology, it's another tool. But we're transitioning into, and what will be really transformative, is that after a while, when we use these tools to such a point where it really does change how we work, and again, that goes back to skills, and taking up skills, and what we can do now, or, you know, because there's other reports, you know, the farmer report and all that, about skills in industries and skills gaps in various industries, lots of industries. And I think about, well, my mom she's a seamstress, and she's worked from fashion to kind of industry, just anything that requires assembling something with a sewing machine, she's done it. And she's done it for 35, 40 years now. But, you know, more and more so. So her expertise in assembling something with the sewing machine is, you know, that is expertise she has, and you can't quite teach the computer that just yet. But the actual assembly part, you can. So as she goes through her professional life, where she didn't have to work on a computer at all, that was kind of, there was a distinction between someone who works in an office, that's the people who work with computers, and then someone who works on a factory floor. You know, maybe the bosses, the managers would have a computer, but now, you know, she's training, and a lot of her training, because the machines are changing as well. So she's finding at in her 50s now, to the world of computational thinking, to do the same job that she's always done. And this kind of reminds me of a report that the paper put out, that said 65%, or they predict 65% of students today will have jobs that don't exist yet.
Yep.
And then this kind of goes in parallel with a UK report on robot and artificial intelligence. And in that report, they recommend that future workers will need to retrain regularly, and on an ongoing basis. So there's that's the transformative side of all of this, where how we perceived our day-to-day lives has been. It won't be. It doesn't necessarily mean it's worse. It doesn't necessarily mean you won't have a job, but it will be a very different kind of job. And it's the kind of job that demands new skills all the time, because the technology will change, and the ways of working will change. So it's not even just upskilling on how to use a different piece of kit, or how to interact with a certain an AI or computer or an interface, but different ways of working with people, because you might be jobs that never worked with data scientists or statisticians will be working with them now.
Yeah. It's interesting when they say about, people need to train more. I mean, I don't know if you've heard of the concept of the natural rate of unemployment. Is that something you heard about?
Walk us through it.
It's I'm trying to, off memory, I could probably just Google it, but I'm gonna test myself. So, looking at the natural rate of unemployment, so I think it's Milton Friedman, and another guy, Edmonds, someone, and it was in the 1960s. They got a Nobel Prize for it as well. So it's thinking about, if you think about that problem, right, as the economy develops and skills become defunct, these people people are always going to fall out of having employable skills. It sort of creates this churn, and I think, in terms of the natural rate of unemployment, I can't remember what the rates are. I mean, it's designed that it's supposed to be quite small, but if you're looking at 10 to 20% of people that are always going to be constantly unemployed because of the skill requirements, like, what's the role of the government in that, or what's the role of some sort of institution to help people through that? Because in terms of, I mean, to train people up is a value-adding exercise. But how do you build a commercial model around helping those people to make them economically productive again? Like, are we gonna see more unemployed people as the churn of learning is higher? Are we going to see? Is that a thing that's going to happen? I'm not too sure what the dynamic is going to be. It'd be interesting to see how it pans out. But we're going to have to change how adult learning works, because at this moment in time, I don't believe there is sufficient infrastructure in place to capture those people.
Well, this is where maybe the MOOCs can offer something. I mean, they talk a lot about MOOCs in
yeah, they do,
about how the knowledge is not locked into the professor or the institution necessarily, but there are these other ways, or locked into just not the institution, but locked into that schedule of going to class at certain times. This is you do an online course at your time, and digest the information at your time. So it's there, but I know what you mean. It's not as fleshed out, and this is happening so fast. I think it's a bit of kind of chasing the tail, isn't it? Because we could imagine what we need in 10, 25 years' time. But by that point, when the kids who are in school now get to that point, did our predictions come true? Is the world set in a way where those skills are the most useful?
Yeah, I guess I think, how can I put it? I think, I don't know if Dan's still listening, but what Dan does, and the way that he's articulated what he does, so being a communicator, I think that's an interesting concept. So, in terms of moving forward for adult education, I do think it's slightly different to the education that you have for doing it the first time, and the role of people that are it's difficult. I can't quite explain it, actually, but it's I don't know if you can give more of an outline to your thinking behind that. But I remember us speaking about it before, and I thought it was really interesting. I think it's a glimpse into the future of adult learning. I don't know if you could expand on that, Dan.
Well, I'm really busy, which is why
Sorry.
I can come in, because if you're talking about me, it's only fair. So the rationale behind it, in part, is that obviously as we're developing all this information at the moment, not much thought is actually being put into the design of the information. So we've got terms like information management where you deal with it, but there's not much around how you actually design it as such. And there's a big school of thought outside of construction actually around how you integrate things like instructions and user guidance into products without realizing it. Like, how do you intuitively know to press a Pelican crossing button to stop the lights? And it's that kind of embedding the instruction and use into something as you use it. So, and it's that kind of idea of, if we're producing all this data, is there actually a way of communicating what we're doing in a much better way of doing it? Could you give a builder information without a specification that gives them enough detail to actually build it without having to read through a document?
Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense in terms of the education piece. So there's
from the I've tangented out. From the education piece, there's
well, no, that's what I mean. So there's this sort of, I suppose it's like active education and passive education. Like from your point of view, you're creating this sort of passive level of education where things are inferred. Like there's no sort of big red sign that says do this. It's more subtle than that. I think that's the thing that's interesting, is we're talking about this natural rate of unemployment, but actually there could be a far subtler way that is more around your communicator type system than a structured education system.
Yeah, so obviously from a lecturing point of view, like the kind of phrase that they typically used was the sage on the stage, where you had that one guy who dictated it, where if you're actually able to do it more passively, you do that kind of guide on the side, where you're actually giving someone that kind of passive support as opposed to just that one direct voice.
Yeah.
Those are two terms that they talk about in the book early on, where they kind of speak about specific professions, and they talk about education, and they do mention the sage on the stage versus the guide on the side. And I know there are kind of startups at the moment who are trying to leverage cloud computing and the internet for more of this guide on the side. But I think what you're saying is, there's, at the moment, we recognize it, but it's still difficult to articulate, and there's lots of new wheels being invented by different people trying to solve this problem, but we haven't quite encapsulated it well enough yet to attack it, head on and precisely. So one of the approaches would be MOOCs, but again, sometimes these new approaches kind of just mirror what we have done. So it's classes, and well, now it's just a pre-recorded class that you watch on YouTube. Or there's essay questions. Oh, okay, now it's a post something on Wikipedia or write a Wikipedia article. We're pushing towards some sort of disruptive way of approaching learning, especially as mature students, but I think also as mature students, because our only example that we've had is what we've went through as younger students. And so we kind of have to go through this ourselves once before we could tell someone else that didn't work, this other way works better.
I mean, obviously quite a good, well, what I consider to be quite a good education method is that kind of almost that Guitar Hero model, whereby you kind of inadvertently learn through playing, and especially now with the whole AR kind of Google Glass kind of thing, I imagine it won't take us very long till we get to the point whereby you can teach someone how to professionally cut onions, piano lessons, even do some complex circuitry repair on microchips or something through some kind of AR instructions, whereby you actually might not need to educate anymore, but all you do is guide.
Go ahead. Go
I
on,
was
Nick.
going to say, Mark Taylor of BAM showed a really good example of what they've done with the Hololens. So they put the HoloLens on the heads of some guys that do fitting out of, drywall petitions, and sort of showing them a different way of setting out. I mean, they said the technology isn't quite there yet, but they managed to do it as a proof of concept. And yeah, I think it just shows that like we're kind of there, like we're there on a prototype level. So if you think about, it's only 2007 that we had iPhones and YouTube, basically, and how far that's come in less than 10 years. So be interesting to see where that kind of world ends up. I think be interesting to see what happens with the economics of the pricing of the products, though, because obviously HoloLens and these AR technologies. Who think of the Daiquiri helmet? These things are tens of thousands of pounds. I don't know if they're going to be able to, an order of 10 cheaper in 5 years' time, but
Well, I imagine it's possible. I mean, VR headsets are quite expensive, and you've now got Google Cardboard.
Yeah, I guess. But then you say that, but how much is the phone that you're slotting into the cardboard?
Well, that's fine, but that fits that order of tens model.
Well, I guess. I'll give you that one.
You don't give me them often, so it's fine. Thank you.
Yeah. I think in terms of the AI in the book, I think the other thing, and what's his name? I was trying to Google him earlier.
The author?
No. It's a guy called Peter Schwartz. I'm not too sure what his position is, but he's sort of a VP or something at Salesforce. But he's an interesting guy. So he's one of the guys that he's worked on space programs. He's from he ran a department at Stanford. He worked with very early climate models. He was a scientific advisor for the Minority Report and things like that. So he had an interesting view on AI. And one of the things that he mentions that is connected with the book is the role of sort of little AI. And he said, he described the things that a chief executive that was able to do normally, talking about an assistant that can help him book, I need to go to, my plans have changed and I need to fly to Mexico for the next couple of days. I need to have these things booked. But last time I went to Mexico, I had this driver. I want to make sure I don't have him. I want to have someone different, and all these different sort of things that a chief executive of a large corporation will be able to have. And he said that with little AI, that's pretty much available now, you can have that level of assistance. He's saying we're about to place an executive level assistance that's been automated via AI in the hands of everyone. And he said you might think, oh well, so what? But think of the way that people organize themselves, and actually when you look at human behavior and how naturally inefficient we are in organizing ourselves without using technology, and this step change in people trying to organize themselves and be self-effective using these things. And I thought it's quite interesting, because the book talks about the professions, but I think the one thing that the book misses out on is these tools aren't just available for the professions. They're going to be available to everyone, because this stuff is reaching consumer level pricing and availability. So I think that's an interesting dynamic that the book kind of misses. It talks about the future of lawyers and the architects and doctors, but doesn't say about the patients coming in and having a level of data expectancy and et cetera, et cetera.
I disagree in part, because I thought it wasn't a big part of it how you're actually removing the need for the learned professional, and then you're getting to the point whereby if you have got this clever Watson-based doctor, the patient becomes his own doctor, and you're actually removing the profession as a result of that. So why you need an architect if you've got a wiki house and a bunch of standard details you can download?
Yeah, I guess is that level of democratization. I get that. I just don't think it doesn't talk enough about end users. It connects them to the sense of being able to have like a forum level of access to information.
Yes.
I can go on a forum and find some loose generic legal aid, for example. But I think it will go further than that, a little bit quicker than they said. That's all. That's my criticism.
Right,
Oh, go ahead, Dan.
I'm going to counter to that, so I'll stay quiet.
It's not much of a counter, but I think they talk about the transformative side of it. So I think they're anticipating, and they know it will happen, and they do mention in the book that even the people they talked to when they were gathering information, when will this kind of transformative part of dealing with information, where it's not isolated behind a gatekeeper. When do you think this might happen, this kind of new tech? And depending if you're an early adopter or someone kind of holding off, they all agree it will happen. But some people say it'll happen in less than 5 years, whereas in the people who kind of basically don't want to be bothered with it, or having to figure out how to work around it, are in their minds optimistically forecasting that to happen longer down the line. But either way, everybody that they've polled knows it's on the way. And as you say, I think it is happening sooner than some of the resistors are saying. I think, back to away from the professional, as you say, and it kind of comes to the end user, which is like in general anybody. I was wondering what kind of client, the client of the future, what would that person be like? Because I think of a friend who's a consultant in pharmaceuticals, and they're preparing a lot of information, and I think a lot of it was going to be in spreadsheets, and then they were going to pass this on to their client, just kind of not knowing anything about what they were doing. But I was like, well, have you guys thought of maybe developing some sort of app or some sort of kind of cloud portal, web portal, so for the client to access this information through, so they could plug in their numbers, something a bit more interactive, something that doesn't require you to sit and just kind of update a spreadsheet, every few months or so. And it seems like that would be better value for the client as well. And their response was that anything more WYSI, the client wouldn't know how to deal with. And it's not a slam on the client, but that was just the reality of it. So there's a kind of that knowledge gap kind of, not only do we have to worry about the knowledge gap as employees in the future or potential employees, but just that knowledge gap that can happen as any average Joe person living in the world, trying to access information and services.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you say that. I suppose from my experience of working with lots of different organisations, is that it's strange that for the people that, I don't want to say enlightened's probably a bit strong, but for the people that desire to work in the digital space, I've been watching the people that taught me to do my job using drawings and printing things out in highlighters. Computers can do things in better ways. It seems strange. I think we're in this time where the people that desire to work in that way are spending far too much time and effort in convincing other people to be better clients or better whatever, better bosses. And I think that it's quite a big distraction at this moment in time, if that makes sense. Now I just think over time that disbalance will be addressed, but I just find it a shame. There's lots of really smart people out there that are burning an awful lot of energy in doing things that they shouldn't really be doing. They should, I don't know, maybe they need to sort of go, no pun, but go back to the drawing board and think about how can you make what you're trying to do smaller and more and easier to deliver and easier to show the benefits of. I think there's too much, it's not pie in the sky, but too much promising of this big system that's going to be better for everyone, and have more very thin slice of this is something that we can get done in a couple of weeks, and we'll just do lots of little bits. I'm not saying everything can't be finished, can't be achieved doing lots of little slices. There are elements of big system changes, but I don't think you can have a big system change and then deliver the little bits. I think you need to build up the momentum with the little bits to bring about that system change. I think that's the thing that many innovators and people of our generation in organizations that are trying to change them, I think that's the stumbling block, is lots of over-promising on big systems and not thinking about getting smaller pieces done in the near term. I think it will change 5 years' time, but in the short term, it's very difficult. I think this is where this book comes in terms of, I think at the beginning it talks about when they looked at the law profession in their first book and how it's come today, and some bits have come along really quickly and some bits haven't come along as quickly. I think it's just interesting that how slowly it's happening. But then, I don't know, incomplete thought, but I wondered what you thought.
Well, you know what you just described there, right? Deconstruction and computational thinking.
Yeah.
Breaking down the problem into smaller bits. And maybe at some point we could just find a function that works and then loop it. If this, then that, else something else. Still working on it.
Maybe with a little bit of human stuff. Just where it's top of the hour. I need to have a little man I need to go put to bed, or help put to bed. I'm aware.
That's all right. I think that's a good place to end it all. Back on computational thinking. Well, thank you very much, Neil, and Dan as well for jumping in there. See, next Thursday will be the last one rounding out this book. It'll be the end, chapters 6 and 7 on objections and anxieties, and then I think we definitely waded in a bit on that. And then after profession, excuse me.
Yeah, I think we were heading that way at the end of the conversation, weren't we? So good preview for next week.
Exactly. All right. Well, good night, everybody, and see you next week.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Good night. Bye.